We had great perspectives this morning, but wow. We're going to hear now from a European institutional perspective, a US institutional perspective, and finally then another of our federal partners, the perspectives there of handling the issues of allegations of research misconduct. So we will go in that order with Wouter Vandevelde, then Mary Walsh, then Bill Trenkle. Let me just, in a means of just opening briefly, anchoring back to Ed's presentation, I do need to mention that NIH is a funding partner with us now. We're very pleased that Dr. Mike Lauer and his colleagues have contributed significant funding to help us get this program advanced, and we are exploring all of the things Ed talked about, hosting and eventual positioning of the software. But we're quite a ways away. We've all been with the government quite a while, and we know, if we could wave a magic wand, it would have been done already. But we will get there, and we just couldn't be more excited. So you heard from Ranjini this morning as well about the high-level procedural issues that ORI follows, driven by our regulation. The US government had a model regulation promulgated in 2000 by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And then all of the research funding departments and agencies since then have promulgated a very similar regulation, ORIs, for example, in 2005. So our own regulation is now over 15 years old, and the regulatory change process for the United States is quite onerous. Again, you can't just wave a wand, make a pronouncement, and change it. It is quite a public and quite an engaging process. So more to come, but we know that that's out there. So among the big thorny issues that the institutions deal with, you've heard about really already, but where we particularly wanted to engage, not into the weeds of process, but we heard this morning from the presentations about sequestration and all the data platforms, images, numbers, data, all kinds, anything electronic. How do we appropriately, quickly and completely sequester so that we can then ensure the optimal opportunity to investigate an allegation? Then it's the actual data and image analysis itself, the tools to do that, because we are overwhelmed in the volume of that kind of information that we face. And then obviously as well within the institutions, data management protocols and file management and the sorts of things that can help an institution line up and align the kinds of information that might be sought facing an allegation. So let me stop there and let's go first then to Wouter. And we'll each of the presenters will do about 5 minutes, and then we'll have sort of a dialogue around a number of questions that we all wrestle with. Well, they wrestle with. I can say that since I sign the documents and others are doing it, or I are doing the real day-to-day work. God bless them. Every single one is wonderful. So at any rate, Wouter, let me turn to you to get us started and shut my phone off, which I forgot to do.
Thank you, Wanda. I prepared a few slides just to introduce myself. Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Wouter Vandevelde, and I'm an advisor on research integrity and ethics working at KU Leuven in Belgium. So also small disclaimer from my part, I'm also not a computational researcher, but I rather have a background in biomedical sciences, more specifically cardiovascular research. Before my current position as an advisor on research integrity, I also worked a few years as an assistant editor for a research journal, where I was involved in the quality check of submitted manuscripts. Being in that position, I was also, I encountered lots of instances of breaches of good academic practices, including then problems with statistics, but also image manipulation. So after my experience with the journal, I'm now using my experience within the research coordination office of our university. So both or in multiple ways. So I'm an advisor on matters related to integrity and ethics. I'm also supporting individual researchers. I'm helping out with training initiatives within the university, but I'm also helping out with our Commission on Research Integrity and also policy within the university on specific topics related to integrity. So I also want to point out, I'm not a formal member of our Commission on Research Integrity. So I do not decide on specific cases, but I do support or provide my support within the research. So the viewpoints in the discussion are not necessarily the official position of the university of our commission. So we talked a lot about, or the first part of the day, it talked a lot about the US perspective on research misconduct and questionable research practices. So the perspective from the European side is a bit different. So within our case, the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity is our main document to go to. If you look at this, the overarching idea is that research communities, they have the basic responsibility to work together, to formulate principles of research, to define the criteria for proper research behavior, to maximize the quality and robustness of research, and to also adequately respond to threats or violation of research integrity. So this code of conduct helps us to realize this responsibility that we have. And yeah, it serves as some kind of framework for self-regulation. So in most EU countries, so the responsibility for looking at improper research behavior and to correct this lies within the institution itself. So as such, we do not have any formal overarching regulatory agency or institution overlooking whether we do a correct job. Yeah. But this also means that we have to take this responsibility serious and really demonstrate to the research community that we should have their trust in doing so. So that might be a little bit different in Scandinavian countries. There are, for example, Denmark, Sweden. They are developing, or they have a legislation on research and misconduct. And in those cases, there is it can be that the process is overseen by an external board. So within KU Leuven, we do have a commission on research integrity. So it's not just one person. So we have a procedure in place if necessary to look into misconduct or questionable research practices. And so we do not only, the commission does not only handle misconduct, but it also helps or guides policy and good practices and advises researchers. So I will not go into complete detail. So the complaints are handled by a reporting desk. When they are deemed admissible, they are investigated by a panel of full professors at the university. It can be that the case is unfounded, but it might also well be that they are well founded. And there we make a distinction between minor misconduct and serious misconduct. In case of minor misconduct, a remediation can be done by the Commission on Research Integrity itself. If there are serious breaches of misconduct, it has to be communicated to the rector. And if there are sanctions needed, it goes via the academic instances. So it's not the Commission on Research Integrity that can do that. So that does mean that that our Commission on Research Integrity is in an advising committee. So the system, it does not mean because we don't have any higher instance or agency we have to report to, that we do not interact with others. So for example, with funders, KU Leuven does have an agreement with ORI in place when dealing with possible research misconduct. Similarly, we also couple back to the biggest national funder in Belgium, to the FWO. So there is a communication with the funders. So that's I will end my introduction here and give the word to the next panelists.
Excellent, thanks. Mary?
Mary, we can't hear you. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
No, we cannot hear you.
Can't hear you. Go to the next one. Yeah, go to Bill for her while she works it out, if that's okay. Thanks,
Got
guys.
it.
Oh, that's fine.
Bill, you're on. Thanks.
All right, let me share my screen. I prepared some slides. It looks like a lot of slides, but actually I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. Here into presenter mode. Okay.
There you go.
So I am the Department Scientific Integrity Officer for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm also, as Wanda mentioned, the Senior Advisor for Scientific Integrity at the department. And I came to this position, giving you just a quick background. Originally, I was a funded research professor doing organic synthetic chemistry, moved to the National Institutes of Health as a core facility director, and then moved from research to program oversight, and finally to ORI, and spent about 8 years at the Office of Research Integrity doing various types of image analysis and case oversight, served as the division director for both DEI and DIO there, and then moved in 2018 to the US Department of Agriculture, where I am responsible for scientific integrity for the department. And I'm just going to give you a little background on what that means, talk about what the structure of USDA is, and then talk about how our process differs from what you heard earlier from Ranjini and from Lauren and Karina. So the Department of Agriculture has both a departmental regulation and a manual on scientific integrity. The department regulation talks about what we expect of our employees. The department manual outlines the procedures for how we respond to allegations that there has been a compromise of those principles. And what is the purpose of our scientific integrity policy? It's really to instill public confidence in USDA research and the science-based public policy making that we do as a department. And it accomplishes this by articulating the principles of scientific integrity, as well as the roles and responsibilities of our employees in upholding these principles, and establishing defined procedures for how we respond to allegations that scientific integrity has been compromised.
Hello.
Mary, you're working. What is scientific integrity? Interestingly, there's currently still no federal government-wide definition, but several agencies, including USDA, have adopted the common definition that it's the condition that results from adherence to professional values and practices when conducting, reporting, and applying the results of scientific activities that ensures objectivity, clarity, and reproducibility. This is really your rigor and reproducibility aspects of responsible conduct of research, while providing insulation from bias, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, inappropriate influence, political interference, censorship, as well as inadequate procedural and information security. You can see that this is a very broad umbrella, because the fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, that little subset is research misconduct definitionally at the US government level. and it goes even so far into the inadequate procedural and information security, is the data that you collected in the field transferred with fidelity to your database and subsequently to the archive. And what is the structure at USDA and how do we work this? Well, there's the Office of the Chief Scientist, and currently the acting Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics mission area, as well as the acting Chief Scientist, is Dr. Wanda Jacobs-Young, and she is the Agriculture Research Service Administrator. So she is the director of one of our agencies and serving in a role that is normally a Senate-confirmed political appointee. And then the head of our office, the Office of the Chief Scientist, is Dr. Dion Toombs. The Chief Scientist position was established by the Farm Bill in 2009. And the role of the Chief Scientist is to coordinate across the U.S. Department of Agriculture all aspects of science. And it was assigned to the Undersecretary for REE as an additional role. And I am one of the senior advisors in the Office of the Chief Scientist, as well as serving as the USDA Research Integrity Officer. So I am ultimately responsible for all research misconduct involving our employees. And the Chief Scientist's office has a number of senior advisors in a variety of areas, including animal production, climate change, international affairs, scientific integrity, so that we serve to bring together the entire department at a higher level than just the individual agencies. So what am I talking about? Now, this is a bit of a busy slide, and I apologize for that, but it's kind of necessary because it's a complex department. We have the secretary and deputy secretary, and then there are 7 mission areas here on the bottom. Those mission areas are all led by undersecretaries, each of whom is Senate confirmed. Now, our secretary was recently confirmed, Secretary Vilsack, but we are still waiting for the deputy secretary and many of the undersecretaries to be confirmed. 3 of the mission areas, REE, Natural Resource and Environment, and Marketing and Regulatory programs, have active research programs, which are most primarily what I'm responsible for. But my role at the department level is also to ensure that all USDA employees understand the SIP and are engaged. We have over 100,000 employees and a very broad portfolio for everything from food safety throughout the food chain in the United States to fighting forest fires with the Forest Service to international trade and basic research. In terms of funding, this is from the federal budget. This is just the R&D dollars, not the money for training and others. You can see that we're 6th, we're just behind NSF, and HHS is certainly much higher on the list than we are. These numbers are clearly lower than the total enacted budgets, but they give a good sense for the relative funding of the various agencies and departments. And within agriculture, the 4 main ones in REE are the Agriculture Research Service, which is at the top here, and that is our intramural research program, the Economic Research Service, the National Agriculture Statistics Service, and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Now, at USDA, we're almost the inverse of HHS, where HHS is about 90% funding at the institutions and about 10% for their intramural program. It's almost the opposite at USDA, where we're more at like 85% intramural funding and 15% at our various institutions. This does not include our capacity funding that goes to our land grant universities to support agriculture programs across the United States. And really just what is the differences in our intramural versus extramural? So our extramural process is really the same as what Rangini described. This is just a high level. We have our own regulation 2 CFR 422. And the main difference is that we ask that institutions provide their research misconduct policies to us for review and approval prior to the investigation and reserve the right to conduct our own investigations, either through OIG or otherwise. And then in our oversight, we determine whether or not the institutional response is sufficient. And if it's not, we could proceed with a debarment process. However, USDA, similar to NSF, we do not make public findings of research misconduct at this time. That is not to say that it won't change. Our intramural process is effectively the same. We've got inquiry, investigation, rebuttal, and agency decision. And then we have an appeal that goes to the department level. I run that as the ex officio chair of that. And the chief scientist serves as the ultimate deciding official for the appeal. And that's how the whole process works. And I can let everyone have copies of links to where we are. But that's what we do at USDA. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. And Wouter as well. I'm policing everybody's time just to optimize the time for that discussion as well as for Q&A, because I don't know about everybody else, but I've found the Q&A to be really, really rich. So, you know, I really think that's what this is about. If we can't hobnob over coffee, the best we can do is share a few electrons back and forth and try to get to some of this stuff. So Mary, it sounded like your audio and all.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yay!
Yes. Let's
Yay,
go.
technology.
Woohoo!
Okay, so I'm going to be short and sweet so we can get to that fantastic discussion phase. It's been already such a wonderful conference. I'm learning so much, and I'm really just grateful to be part of the conversation and to be part of a fantastic and distinguished group of fellow panel members. So thank you. So let me just swap. Can everybody see the slides, which are in the middle of my presentation? So hold on one second. Yeah, technology. Here we go again. How about that? Better? Not better. Okay. So I'm going to do it from this because I can see this and I think you guys can see this. So we can get through these. So my role is as a data analyst, and I've been doing this work for about 10 years. My title is Chief Scientific Investigator at Harvard Medical School. And so I'm just going to share the perspective of how we approach this from the data pipeline. And we've already talked a bit about some of these different details. And so with regards to how any one of these kinds of research misconduct proceedings kick off, is that we get information with regards to potentially problematic data coming in from all over the place. And at Harvard Medical School, certainly it can come in anonymously, but we do obviously have questions and certain information coming in from local PIs of labs, colleagues that work in our research communities, institutional officials. And then of course, we also have a lot of these questions that come in from outside of our institution with regards to colleagues, collaborators, editors of journals, obviously institutional officials and our federal partners, and a very active scientific public. The point of all this though, is that every single one of these questions are looked at by our office. It's an incredible amount of information coming in. We take these questions very responsibly. We look at every single one of them and then think about what needs to happen with regards to some of the next steps and thinking about data and looking at the research records. And again, I'll go through this very quickly. The point of this slide is that this is a typical system we've seen a couple of times today with regards to the US process with our federal partners and thinking about evaluating potential claims of research misconduct. But importantly here, I'll just share is that the process is not different with regards to whether or not the research may be federally funded or not. We don't establish two systems of evaluating the research record so that we don't introduce bias in the system. And so with regards to how this data goes through the pipeline, it's exactly the same. In someone in my role, and actually my title is CSI, that was not by design, but in thinking about how we support each one of these levels, my job is to think about how to help stakeholders tasked with deciding whether or not research misconduct has happened in making those decisions. And so this is an incredibly hefty task, as we've been talking about today. And in framing up what we deal with in terms of some of the larger scale problems, I thought I'd just focus on two with regards to some of our next steps. And we've already heard about this. In thinking about, number one is really the size and the organization and security of the research record. How do we do this? And this is done, across different organizations. It's coming in from different sources. Certainly the trajectory of all this information is dynamic, it's not linear. And the same thing is true for our research records, right? They're coming from all different sources, individuals, subject matter expertise. And so we need to think about, as data analysts, is how to secure this record, how to evaluate this record, and to support the process moving forward. And this in and of itself is an incredible task, especially when we need to think about formal processes like sequestration of data and utilizing technology, and really working this into a large-scale data management strategy with regards to the work ahead. And so even before you get to looking at the data or analyzing the data, this task is monumental. And it's a profession in and of itself, and it's certainly something that we hear from our scientists as well in our research communities as they deal with this as well, in terms of we are now stewards of mass amounts of data, and how do we do this effectively? And so when you think about these kinds of conversations together, and certainly when we're thinking about tools, is thinking about this particular piece, because when it's done well, this certainly sets a baseline for any effective discourse with regards to the research misconduct process. And then, of course, secondly, one of the big places we've been talking about really is the data analysis piece, right? Once we get into the weeds here with regards to, once you have secured the research record, is analyzing the record. And again, we're coming from all different kinds of backgrounds, and the data coming to us is coming from all different kinds of backgrounds. So we really need to think about how we're effectively looking at this information, right? And we often make sure that we recommend to ourselves that we approach this similar to doing a scientific experiment, right? Why are you looking at this data? How are you going about doing this? Making sure that you're utilizing copies of data and not the original raw data. Again, not unlike we ask our scientists to do their kinds of work. When we think about this kind of work in the research misconduct process and in research integrity offices, we have to also think about abiding by those same standards. Really collecting all that information, leveraging your metadata and your data together. And importantly as well, as we think about this entire process, is that we have to do this with regards to not only for ourselves, but for all the individuals involved in the process, stakeholders, respondents. And so making sure that we abide by, again, the same principles we expect our research communities to operate by when we think about the work that we do, and also when we start thinking about how to automate and create tools in these areas. So I'm just going to quickly go through the last couple of slides because I do want to get through to the panel discussion. But if you haven't gotten the message yet, part of this is all about this data analysis piece and thinking about leveraging our data. And in particular, we've talked about a lot of different tools. Our team has certainly thought about this, and a lot of other research integrity teams have thought about this as well. It's because when I started this work, it wasn't because I was looking to develop tools, but it certainly came up as part of my work that we needed to really think about how to automate these processes. And certainly with regards to some of the image data analysis that we needed to do, we started to move into this tool development. So we'll mention the team that I've worked with in putting some of this information together, and how important it is to collaborate as a community with regards to this kind of work. Certainly, I would also mention that we need to think about being open and sharing this information. And so just as an example, this is our GitHub for all the work that we've done in thinking about tool development, and not only thinking about the codes and the approaches that we've been discussing with regards to algorithm development, but certainly thinking about the databases and a lot of the information that we're creating to create these tools is thinking about how to share those effectively as well. And so we certainly have thought about that. And you can take a look at our website and think about in different ways in which we can continue to walk the walk with respect to the work that we're developing. It certainly takes a village. I'm incredibly lucky to work with an incredible research integrity team. Doing any of this kind of work effectively requires a lot of different successful collaborations. I'm super grateful for our computational team. We've worked with collaborators and supporters in thinking about the important data that we require to do this kind of work. Certainly being partners with our federal integrity offices, and certainly the work that they do to support this kind of effort. And really thinking about leveraging these opportunities that we have like today with regards to groups that think about this proactively so that we can really start to change and shift the needle with regards to taking the burden off of some of the efforts that we need to be doing in the research integrity space, and which we're struggling with altogether, and trying to move that needle of technology forward. So I'm going to stop there so we can quickly go into the panel discussion and take some questions, as I know that they're starting to come up.
Great, Mary. Thanks so much. And thank you to all the panelists for giving us just a very brief synopsis of the sorts of things, the guide rails that you all follow, and the strong sense that you all have expressed of the sheer volume of work that's coming in and how critical tools are to handle that work that's coming on. So, when you think about how much the folks who would create mayhem in science by falsifying, fabricating, plagiarizing, or doing other sorts of bad acts with their results, what poses the most significant risk when you think about the technologies and how fraudsters might use them? And how do you stay ahead?
I guess
Wouter,
I will jump in
okay,
there.
Bill. I
and
was thinking I
mention,
saw Wouter go on off mute first, but
effectively, in many ways, it becomes a race to who can develop the tool faster. And it's just a moving target in terms of, when you consider how rapidly GANs came in, and then identifying tools for how do you detect GANs. This is really a challenge. And it is an unresolved challenge.
I think it's definitely, just in follow up to that, we're sadly very reactive. And I think part of these discussions is trying to be proactive, and we're not going to be able to figure out how these things are coming at us, but we have a certain sense of from our past experiences as to the different types, patterns, and approaches. And certainly just, again, trying to, I would say these kinds of conversations and having these discussions more openly about what we're all seeing also gives us a sense of where we need to prioritize with regards to how to spot certain things and how to partner with particular groups and technologies to get ahead of that tide.
Wouter, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just want to comment. I really liked the previous talk. I'm of course aware of the paper mills and the problems related to that, but yeah, the GAN and the synthetic images, that was something rather new to me. So to me, I'm convinced that this is a significant threat, and yeah, would be nice to have tools and helping to discover those things. So.
I know I've joked for a long time, particularly after crossing a certain age and not ever having acquainted myself with Lady Clairol, that, gosh, 20 years younger, 20 pounds thinner. And the capacity of just Photoshop today to be able to do all kinds of stuff, let alone to think the threat that GANs pose. It's just being able to stay ahead of those technologies that I think will forever be, well, maybe full employment for somebody. Dorothy Bishop has raised a point that maybe you'd get less misconduct if you change the incentive system, rewarding researchers for having strong methods, transparent data, scripts, etc., versus having flashy publications. Panel have any perspective on that at all? Incentives of any sort that might be thought about?
Well, certainly that comes out, when we talked earlier a bit about I think Susan Garfinkel brought it up, the research misconduct process and these other elements that are parallel and tangential to that work and often come out from those experiences. that certainly comes out from our standing committees, for example, the university, that see the end product of a lot of this work and these discussions. And even in the absence of research misconduct, they're often critical in helping partner with us in getting the word out with regards to what they're seeing in terms of some of these practices and problems that we're seeing and incentives that we're seeing in the community, in order to have leadership and buy-in from organizations to help shift that culture. And so being able in this research misconduct space to leverage, I mean, it's horrible to say, but don't waste a good crisis. When you're seeing this as a 360-degree perspective of these analyses, it's important to get that critical feedback to the institutions and to organizations, so that number one, you can correct the bad data, but two is to really think about how do we get ahead, again, be proactive about these problems that we're seeing in practice, and gaps in priorities, perhaps in training, that are lessons that we're learning from these, sometimes these very long and very data-laden processes.
Wouter or Bill?
Yeah, related to the incentive system, I do think that can indeed be useful. So changing the incentives, but on the other hand, I still believe that most of the researchers are honest and that they want the best for science. So I think you have to really make the distinction between honest errors and so misconduct, questionable research practices. So deliberate and yeah, by accident. So one of the things that we really want to do is focus more on training, on awareness raising of young researchers, of the supervisors, because that can already help a lot in prevention and making sure that some things don't happen. I think fraudsters, people that want to fraud, they will still fraud, independent of technology. They will find a way to do that. But I do think there is still room in training the researchers.
Bill?
And I would add that I think that one can draw some good analogies to white collar crime and the way OIG approaches, the Office of the Inspector General approaches white collar crime, which is the fraud triangle, which there are three parts to the decision to engage in fraud: the opportunity, the rationalization, and the motivation pressure. So the opportunity we're trying to reduce by saying, hey, you know, we've got the tools to beat it. The rationalization we address with education by saying this matters. You shouldn't say it won't matter, you can fake it. But then the question that was raised by Dorothy was really more about the pressure, you know, the incentive system. And it's a real challenge because there are a variety of reasons that people engage in misconduct. Some of them are semi-altruistic, but nonetheless, it's a forbidden act.
And the pressure and the incentives and the conflicts of interest and all really come with Paul Brooks's question as well, with individuals accused of misconduct who might be the big money makers for the institutions. They're the cash cows, as he describes them. They get lots of grant dollars. The misconduct may or may not be research misconduct. It could extend into the broader NIH definitions that they are holding universities accountable for. And so there's a perverse incentive, if you will, for institutions to even engage around this. So what do you all propose there? Or how do you deal with that at the institutional level and the challenges that you might face that, you know, the PI is insisting, as Deborah has alluded as well, that you've got to do it this way. You need that high profile journal publication, whatever it is, the PI pressure is creating the institutional pressure because of the money coming in. You know, what are the exigencies there that you as institutions deal with and try to sort through? How do you sort through that, independent of whether or not you have tools available to conduct a truly fair and objective evaluation of sequestered evidence? I asked an easy question, didn't I? The participants did, actually.
This is, I know a lot of, we're all struggling with this. I think, you know, I've had the opportunity to take off the reactive hat in looking at data and be part of a conversation around research rigor and reproducibility, right? And how we as an organization want to address these matters, and certainly getting that buy-in, right, from the administration first to say, this is really important, we need to look at it, and then thinking about, well, how are we going to look at it? We can't, for example, throw a big bag of money at it, like the what's in it for me, and getting people motivated to take on a lot of these tasks that we're looking at in questionable research practices. Well, then how are you going to do it? A lot of this is part of that culture shift, and there's been some great conversations, like, for example, the World Conference on Research Integrity, thinking about the Hong Kong principles, DORA, and thinking about, all right, what are our carrots versus our sticks? Our carrots are, in what we value in our system are, for example, promotion and tenure system. Well, if this perhaps could be a way, do we want to shift recognition and the value structure around individuals who take on this Herculean task of thinking about what research practice is and how important it is, just as much in many ways sometimes to the data that we're looking at, is how you get there, and valuing those questions and valuing individuals who invest in that process. So that's certainly one way that our institution, I know that others are looking at with regards to the culture shift discussion. And I'll look to my colleagues on the panel for additional parallels I know that are out there.
So I have two answers to this, because I have oversight over both my intramural scientists who are doing work, and they don't compete for grants. So their money is there. They have to pitch their ideas, but their jobs are secure. So there is a little less incentivization in, you know, the USDA intramural program. But one of the things that has always jumped out at me whenever we start to discuss about how, as Dorothy Bishop said, you know, this is the way we do science, is that if you consider the community of who is actually rewarding this type of behavior, it's always the faculty within the community, because they serve as the reviewers at the grants. They serve as the reviewers of the papers. They serve on the tenure committees. And so really what we're talking about is trying to get each community to change their mores to reward things like excellent data sets. And yes, there is a role for the federal government, but it's going to be a real challenge if the community, which is the faculty who exist and serve on our panels, doesn't buy in.
Wouter, anything to add? And we'll go on to John Wood's comment.
Very small contribution. So within CRI Leuven, we are also moving, so there is a cultural shift. So instead of focusing on the high impact publication, Mary also referred to the Hong Kong principles, the DORA. So there is a shift towards contribution. So not necessarily your papers, but what do you consider your contribution to research? And that is integrated in the review processes in the institution right now. So we are on the way to, that can be seen as an incentive.
And John Wood's comment about data being inherently messy, sort of by extension, you know, what gets published is sort of the pretty stuff, if you will. Negative results, very difficult to get out there in the literature. Messy data, inconclusive results that could still be informative for a secondary or downstream hypothesis. It just doesn't surface. So any thoughts as Ellie has weighed in, that the publish or perish climate, what it does to young scientists, how that interferes. So any thoughts there?
Yeah, I do agree with this thing, and I think we have to move forward to a climate that is not focusing on positive results, and yeah, in most cases research isn't positive, and we have to acknowledge that, and also we use that data and publish it. And yeah, I think we really have to get away from the positive results.
I think this gets to Bill's point earlier in thinking about the faculty buy-in, is because when you have young trainees and students come into environment, and that's the standard they're given, that's the bar to get your degree, to move to successful lab, to move up. That's the value system you're establishing from day one. And so the faculty are going to be a large part of that voice in changing that trajectory. So not only changing the value system, but also how we approach science. I mean, there, in addition to all of these other messy data, negative results, all of this, it's all data. Negative, that's data. We are in the business of performing research, and that's part of the package. And part of that package as well is error. And so in thinking about also destigmatizing error in this environment as well, so that you're getting a more completely open approach to the scientific process. In thinking about the practice here and the questionable research practices that start to develop are largely around that hypothesis-driven work that we do every day as researchers. And so in embracing that system, it embraces all of this, that it's messy, that it's noisy, that errors are made, that it's not easy, that it takes an incredible amount of technology and an incredible amount of data that you're going to be responsible for. It's part of that recognition package. And so having faculty at day one being part of that process to shift that culture system and start recognizing all of these elements is part of how we start moving that needle.
Nice.
And I will just summarize. I agree with everything said by my co-panelists, and it is so field specific. I mean, a lot of these meetings are very focused on biomedical, and I was originally in the biomedical fields too, and now being on the agricultural side, there is a lot less pressure at the individual institutions, it appears, in many ways, because there's not as large of an expectation of, pulling in tons of money. And, the institutions have driven that in part by rewarding people who bring in a lot of grants, because it funds institutional operations. And I don't know how much of it's because it's really hard to fake a 2,000-pound cow as opposed to a mouse.
You can clone them.
Yeah, but
Bill,
you
if
can't
could
just
think
whip
it, they
one
would
up.
do it.
Oh, but maybe there's a Gans out there somewhere. So
there is, as a matter of fact, and we're actually generating synthetic crop images. I can show you some of those.
Oh yeah.
Ed, you're killing me.
I'm sorry.
Oh, Bill, you should listen to Ed. Oh my goodness. You reach out and find out what's going on in that world. So sort of, and Walter, you raised this, and I actually made a note on it and did want to come back, because Dorothy's raised a question about consequences for people who have found to have committed misconduct. Your scheme there differentiated minor and then major. So is there a scale, if you will, of consequences? And what is that? Where do you draw the line? What's minor? What's major? Help us understand what that's about, and let's talk about consequences, and maybe even timelines, if it's 2 or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years after the act occurred. How relevant are consequences?
Yeah, so first of all, I really think we have to make the distinction between the work that our committee on research integrity does. So it's really an advising committee. Yeah? So where it goes from, when looking at remediation, it can go from correcting a paper, retracting a paper, to installing good procedures in a certain environment, and monitor those. When it comes to the more serious things, so it can be fabrication, falsification, it can be repeated offenses of issues against authorship, for example. Yeah? Then we feel that the remediation that we can do is not sufficient to solve the problem. Yeah? And in that case, the issue is forwarded to the academic instances. What happens over there, that's outside of the commission. So we cannot really influence the actions that or the punishment that is taken at that point. So that's really up to the university, to the academic itself to follow up. So and then it really depends. So it's an ad hoc procedure. So it really depends on the case, on the severity, and like you say, the timeline and the duration. Yeah, it's case to case, case by case, that we have to look at.
Okay, Mary or Bill, anything to add?
So I can answer that from the standpoint of Department of Agriculture. I'm the department level person, but then each of our agencies has an agency scientific integrity officer who serves as the agency research integrity officer, which is the equivalent to like Lauren's position or Gretchen Brudnicki at Harvard. And then they lead the investigation panels, and our committees actually come to findings about the research misconduct or breach of scientific integrity, because those are objective findings, but the remedies for our employees are separate. And so those go through, for anyone who's familiar with the federal system with employee correction, Douglas factors. And HR does it, and it's appealable to the Merit System Promotions Board. And so that's a completely separate correction and, you know, research misconduct finding, which can include up to and including, of course, termination and or debarment.
And I would
Okay.
just say from the U.S. system that we've heard about earlier is that our, you know, those panels make recommendations, but ultimately it's the deciding officials and institutions with regards to what those steps are taken. And oftentimes, you know, they fully embrace what comes from those panel discussions, and oftentimes supplement those with additional action, and then partner with offices like HR throughout institutions to execute with regards to next steps. But certainly, even in the absence of research misconduct, the discussions with regards to a lot of what we're hearing, more and more so, our faculty committee on conduct has been very thoughtful about providing feedback back to departments, back to centers, with regards to, you know, there's some problems here. Really think about this with regards to data management, experimental design, and training that you have there. And so the more that we're able to, again, have these conversations within the confines of research misconduct, but activate outside of that, the more we're able to divorce the elements of the actual FFP versus some of the, you know, prior activities with regards to what we're trying to target and change.
Great.
I would also toss in really quickly that our investigation panels at the agency level have a licensed HR investigator as one of the members. And it is proven to be a massive boon, because so often people will talk about, oh yeah, we did this, we did that. And the HR investigator's head is just exploding because it's a prohibited personnel practice. But that allows us as an agency and department, and a department as a whole, to improve our overall processes and protect our employees.
A couple of comments in the chat about moving away from journal impact factors, paper counts, et cetera, as a means to shift the incentive, shift the culture, the pressure to some degree. And then obviously data repositories. You know, boy, 10 years ago, it seemed like a pipe dream. And many of us in the federal government considered it almost impossible. And yet, you know, we actually all look at PubMed and the Library of Medicine and any number of places that have evolved to be the repositories of our published literature. So why not the data? Although data's messy and it's all kinds of different formats. But I think we're just taking some enormous steps in the past few years. So that really is a great promising trend, but it's still going to be a gnarly problem for all of us. Let's see, and Lauren makes a great point about the RIOs, that our senior faculty having advantages, but you know, the institutions having procedures and senior leadership in place who really protects and buffers the institutional politics, if you will, from the integrity of the investigation and the process itself, whether it's a vice president for research, whoever it is, at that higher level, no matter who it is that's accused. They can get a fair hearing, obviously, but also that they are not just given a pass because of who they are as that cash cow. It is the same process. So, Lauren, thank you for making that very, very critical point. And systemic flaws, I'm avoiding clicking on links so I can try to stay on top of chat. We still have about 10 minutes till Daniel gives me the boot here. If there are other questions, folks want to unmute. Daniel, can they unmute and ask a question live, come on video, or how would you like to deal with our 10-minute gift here? And hats off to my panelists. This is just fabulous.
Hats off to you as well, Wanda.
Yeah.
But yeah, I say if it's okay with everyone, if they would prefer to raise their hand like Deborah
has her hand.
Let's go with the raising of the hands. Sounds great.
Okay, hi, thank you guys. It's been so great. I wanted to ask you, if your fairy godmother came and gave you one thing, what would the panelists say that they would like to have?
An all-encompassing data management system that takes in everything and processes it and keeps it and reports out on it.
More staff.
Yeah, I was actually going to say more resources as well, but if it was a real fairy godmother, it would be someone who could intervene to burn the hand of people who would do wrong with our public resources. You know, wouldn't that be a great fairy godmother? Obviously, it put us all out of work, but you know, to give a conscience and a better behavioral aspect, you know, to those who would lie, cheat, and steal from those who fund their work. But that's a whole nother point of view, I guess. Other hands up?
Anyone else? I don't see it.
It's such a shy group that you've assembled here, Daniel. We would have people lined up at the microphones if we were there in person.
You must have covered everything, Wanda.
Well, we're also, for our European colleagues, we're just about wearing them out as it burns into the evening. And then obviously our Australian colleagues I hope are sleeping well right now, despite everything that's been talked about. So.
All right. So
I will toss one thing out for your consideration. Okay. One of the things that I do in addition to my job is I serve currently as the vice chair of the Digital and Multimedia Scientific Area Committee for the Forensic Science Board Organization of Scientific Area Committees. And our committee came out with a document on non-routine off-site forensic examination of digital and multimedia evidence and things to consider for when your staff aren't in the office. The Organization of Scientific Area Committees is working to develop high-quality forensic standards and to encourage the adoption of them. It's currently housed in NIST, and I can put in the link to the DMSAC webpage. And if you are interested, you can download it there. It was written by the chair of our subcommittee on video and imaging technologies and analysis. And it can really just help to think about what do we need to do if we can't go into the office, but we still want to ensure that our forensic analysis is valid. And now we have a hand up.
Right. I've missed it. I've tried to scroll through. There we go. Bern.
That's probably, yeah. So if you have a couple of minutes, maybe you can comment a bit more on the interactions between institutions. In the Biosciences, most research papers are based on multi-author collaborations, often across continents. Standards vary dramatically. How do you deal with with that issue. And often it's not even clear to the authors who is actually responsible for problems within certain papers.
That's a great question, Bern. I know we struggle with it as an investigator might leave an institution, go to another because of confidentiality. There is nothing we can say. There might be a notice of concern on an article that somehow the new receiving institution learns about and then reaches out to contact the departing institution. But yeah, definitely, as Yvette has weighed in, the RIO and legal counsel to help guide that, because sometimes institutions are like that close and the person decamps either to home country, where they're even harder to reach, or to another institution where they can sort of burrow in.
Yeah, and we've had cases where where institutions appear to pass the buck essentially to try to also fob it off to the next employer of the person then.
I have served as the convener of, I think it was a 9 or 10 institution panel to identify who was going to have to lead the investigation, or actually in this particular case, it was an inquiry, and then report out to the other institutions what the inquiry had found. So we do try to work together in a collaborative and cooperative mechanism, and to avoid duplicating efforts at multiple institutions.
But for the record, the US is way advanced in that, I would say. Have you had interactions with non-US entities like that?
Multiple times when I was still with the Office of Research Integrity, and yes, there is much less cooperativity on occasion with non-domestic institutions.
Yes.
Lauren made a good point in the chat that
yes.
via grants, right? The National Institutes of Health has been a great connector for some of these conversations because funds travel. So.
Yes, indeed. And as Lauren also points out, Rio to Rio talk. So when you do know that, you know, individual A has gone from institution 1 to institution 2, and you've got enough to make a case for concern, then yes, that conversation is critical. But obviously also talking with counsel to make sure it's a litigious society. And, you know, it really is important to be sure that you've got backing to make that call. I don't know whether Lauren wanted to weigh in. Mary, if you had another perspective as well from the institution, you know, as Yvette points out, that, you know, y'all are talking with one another, sharing information and data, but it's different for us in the federal level.
We certainly take that conversation with need to know and talk with counsel and then talk with colleagues. We have that flexibility in trying to create that need to know bubble with regards to those conversations. And so I think everybody's really thoughtful about that. And certainly it is very collegial with regards to reaching out to individuals once that threshold is, you know, those conversations happen early on, once they feel that threshold is met.
Absolutely, I agree with what Mary just said. And the federal regulators try very hard to be aware of what our authorities are and what they are not, so that we make reasonable requests, as well as enable the types of interactions between two need to know entities, which is why we serve as conveners quite often between, and honestly, it's quite often at the general counsel level, not at the RIO level, because they just feel more comfortable talking to each other, general counsel to general counsel.
Yeah. And
then it gets fed down to the RIOs.
Yeah. And they can also invoke privilege at those levels. So Deborah has suggested in chat making it illegal to litigate scientific integrity inquiries. That's one for the fairy godmother. Is scientific misconduct illegal? To the extent that it's fraud, if you differentiate in that legal definition of fraud, some argue that falsification, fabrication, plagiarism is indeed fraud. but the evidentiary standards that our research misconduct regulation in the US hews to is different from the evidentiary standard for criminal fraud. We certainly have had instances in which investigators have been charged with criminal fraud with their federal dollars, and those are out there in the literature, in the media, in the background.
For the non-US people, there are 3 levels of law in the United States. There's criminal law, civil law, and administrative law. And research misconduct is an administrative law violation.
Thanks, Bill. And Daniel, I see your hand up, so that must be the hook.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There
okay.
was one more question, but we'll.
I just wanted to ask because, and this is like a meta question, maybe perhaps. I kind of fail to bring people from other parts of the world, and that I feel sometimes might be represented in misconduct a lot. So do you have experiences interacting with institutions in Asia, and how that has been?
Limited interactions personally in a historical way. It really depends on what the violation is, and facts matter. Change the facts, change the outcome. And it looks like Susan has a good comment.
Yeah. During my time at ORI, I actually had pretty good interactions with some of the Asian universities if you find the right person to contact. So if you try to go to the person who is the potential respondent, that's usually not very productive. But if you go to anybody senior at that university, if you could track down who that person is, it gets back to the respondent and all of a sudden they respond. I also found that when a foreign institution had federal funding from the US government, they did a pretty good job in handling the allegations according to the PHS policies, which was surprising to me in some ways. But, sorry, allergy. So, I mean, it can be done. It takes some work. It always takes work to find the people, but there are networks now springing up regionally all over the globe for research integrity networks. So the Asia Pacific Rim Network is a group of people who you can contact to get contact information for different institutions in Asia and the Pacific Rim. The Europeans have a good network. So there are ways to look at research globally.
Susan, hats off. During your tenure in ORI, John Dahlberg, David Wright, Zoe Hammett, a number of you were really working toward facilitating that Pacific Rim network, and it continues to this day and is invaluable as a resource. So thank you. And I would note that the one comment in the chat about dismissing an allegation raised in social media, Lauren has provided a very, very nice response to that. So yeah, and Corinna pointed out Zoe. So she was typing probably as I spoke. And I think that runs us right against our end time, Daniel.
Yeah.
So do I get a pass here now?
Yeah.
And hats off to this terrific panel. What an honor to be asked to chair it, but what a great group of folks. And
yeah, thank you so much.
I'm hopeful it's been helpful to everybody.